I always supported my husband. Every week, he visited his parents to help out, and I sent him with my home-cooked meals. One day, I wanted to surprise him and deliver the food myself. But as I walked up to the house, I froze. What I saw made my hands tremble. Subscribe if you believe your worth isn't defined by what you can do for others. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. I loved my husband, Mark. For 15 years, that love was the unwavering sun in my sky, the central truth around which my entire world gracefully revolved. I found a deep and abiding comfort in the steady rhythm of our life together, a quiet haven I had meticulously built with my own 2 hands. My home, with its warm kitchen that always smelled of baking spices and the soft, worn armchair where Mark would read the paper each evening, was a living reflection of my love for nurturing and care. I had willingly stepped away from a bustling career in event planning to create this world, finding a richer, more profound satisfaction in the slow, deliberate art of making a home and caring for the man I so deeply adored. My husband, Mark, was my rock. As a financial analyst, he navigated a world of volatile markets and high-stakes pressure, yet he always came home to me with a steady, calming presence that made me feel safe. What I admired most about him, however, was not his professional success, but his profound sense of duty. He was, in my eyes, the most perfect and devoted son a parent could wish for. Our lives were different, his in the sharp, demanding world of numbers, mine in the soft, tactile world of home, but they harmonized beautifully. I provided the warm, beating heart of our life, and Mark provided the strong, protective walls that kept the harshness of the world at bay. Every single Sunday, like clockwork, Mark would drive 2 hours to his parents' home in the countryside. This was our unspoken ritual, a fundamental and non-negotiable part of our shared life. He had explained to me years ago that his parents were growing frail, that his father's arthritis now made yard work an impossible agony, and that his mother, once a vibrant cook, was now often too tired to prepare proper meals for herself. He went to handle the household tasks that had become too much for them, to fix whatever was broken, and to offer the simple, grounding comfort of his presence. His devotion was beautiful to me. And every Sunday morning, I played my part in this ritual of care. I would rise early to pack him a large cooler bag filled with food. There was always a hearty main course, like a beef stew or a shepherd's pie, a loaf of my homemade bread, a large container of nourishing soup, and a small cake or a batch of cookies for dessert. I knew from Mark's reports that his parents loved my cooking, and it brought me a deep, quiet joy to feel that I was contributing, that I was caring for the people who had raised the man I loved. It was my way of extending my arms around their entire family. He would return late in the evening, always looking drained, his shoulders seeming to carry a heavier load than when he left. He would sink into his favorite armchair with a deep sigh that seemed to come from his very soul, and I would bring him a cup of hot tea, my heart aching with love and sympathy for him. He would tell me about his day, his voice low and tired. He'd report that his mother's spirits were low again this week, or that his father's hands were aching so badly he couldn't even hold a coffee cup properly. I listened, absorbing his quiet pain, and my admiration for him would deepen. This weekly pilgrimage of filial duty was, to me, the ultimate testament to his character. My friend Sarah sometimes questioned it. "He goes every single week?" "Without fail," she asked me once over lunch. "He never takes a Sunday off for himself?" "For you?" I remember feeling a prickle of defensiveness on his behalf. "His parents need him, Sarah," I explained patiently. "It's not a choice for him. It's who he is. He's a good man." She had looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher at the time, a mixture of admiration and something else, something I might now call pity. Lately, however, I had begun to observe a change in my husband. The exhaustion that followed his Sunday visits seemed to have deepened, settling into his bones in a way that felt new and alarming. It wasn't that he was less attentive to me, no, he still kissed me when he left for work, still asked about my day, still held my hand as we watched television in the evenings. But a persistent shadow lingered behind his eyes, an unspoken and profound weariness that he couldn't, or wouldn't, share with me. He seemed to be carrying a heavy, invisible sadness that no amount of my care could seem to penetrate. I, of course, attributed it to the increasing emotional toll of watching his beloved parents decline. My heart broke for him. I tried to surround him with even more care, with more attention, hoping to be a soft place for him to land after his difficult and draining journeys. I would rub the tense muscles in his shoulders as he sat in his chair, his eyes closed. I would cook all his favorite meals during the week, and I worked to keep our home a perfect sanctuary of peace and order, a refuge from his weekly dose of sorrow. I felt his burden as if it were my own, and a fierce, protective love for him welled up inside me. The final push came one Sunday night. He came home later than usual, the lines of exhaustion carved so deeply around his mouth and eyes that he looked 10 years older. He barely touched the dinner I had kept warm for him. He just sank into his chair and stared into the empty fireplace. "Mom had a fall," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "She's okay, just bruised and very shaken. She cried when I left. She didn't want to be alone." The image he painted, of his frail mother, crying and afraid, shattered my heart. Seeing him so broken, so utterly defeated by his love for them, I felt an urgent need to do something more. So, the following Saturday morning, I woke with a new and resolute sense of purpose. I was filled with an unusual surge of inspiration, a desire to do something truly special for him, to lift this great weight from his shoulders, if only for a day. I decided I would drive to his parents' house myself this one time. I would deliver the meal, check in on them, and give Mark a single Sunday of complete and uninterrupted rest. The thought of the surprise filled me with a quiet, loving excitement. I could already picture the look of profound relief on his face when I told him he didn't have to go, that I would handle it for him. I slipped out of bed while he was still asleep and went to the kitchen. The ingredients for the rich beef stew he loved were all there, and I began the slow, meditative process of cooking. I browned the meat, I carefully chopped the carrots, onions, and celery, and I let it all simmer for hours, the rich, savory aroma filling our quiet house. It felt like I was pouring all of my love for him directly into the pot. I packed the hot stew into my best thermal container, along with a still warm loaf of sourdough bread and a lemon drizzle cake I knew his mother, according to him, was particularly fond of. I dressed in comfortable jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, glancing out the window at the bright, crisp autumn day. I grabbed the heavy cooler bag, my car keys, and stepped out into the cool morning air. I opened the trunk of my reliable sedan and carefully loaded the bag, making sure nothing would tip over or spill during the long drive. Once everything was secure, I got behind the wheel and started the car. The engine hummed to life, and with a heart overflowing with love and a sense of mission, I pulled away, heading down the highway toward the countryside, toward my husband's family. I drove calmly, unhurriedly, enjoying the changing scenery as the city's sharp edges softened into rolling fields and dense forests ablaze with autumn color. I played soft music on the radio, humming along as I drove, feeling happy and deeply content. My mind was filled with loving thoughts of Mark, of his goodness, his steadfastness. I thought about our life together, the comfortable world we had built. This act, this drive, felt like the culmination of my role within it, the ultimate supportive gesture. I felt proud to be his wife, proud to be a part of a family that took care of its own with such devotion. Along the way, I imagined my conversation with Mark's parents, picturing the modest, cozy home he had described to me over the years. I saw a small cottage with a sprawling, slightly wild garden and a porch with a worn wooden swing. I pictured his father with gnarled, gentle hands and his mother with a kind, tired smile. I recalled snippets of stories Mark had told me, building a vivid picture in my mind of two kind, aging people who were so incredibly lucky to have a son as devoted as Mark. I felt an immense tenderness for these people I had never met but felt I knew so intimately. As I drove along the familiar route Mark always described, I savored the stunning beauty of the landscape. The trees were dressed in brilliant gold and deep crimson, and the low sun filtered through the leaves, casting intricate, shifting patterns on the asphalt. I felt that this day would be special, filled with a warmth and love that would radiate through our entire family. I was so sure of my purpose, so confident in the goodness of my mission. I could never have possibly imagined the profound and icy shock that was awaiting me at the end of this beautiful country road. As I turned onto the final lane, my heart beat a little faster in anticipation. I saw the mailbox, a sleek, modern design with their surname, Walker, in clean, silver lettering. That was the first small, discordant note. Then I pulled into the gravel driveway and my mind stalled, unable to process what I was seeing. The house was not the small, rustic cottage of my imagination. It was a sleek, modern bungalow with huge picture windows, dark gray siding, and a perfectly, almost professionally, manicured lawn. There was no wild garden, no worn porch swing. The dissonance was so jarring, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. But the name on the mailbox was correct. I parked the car, my mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Perhaps they had recently renovated? Mark would have surely mentioned it. I took a deep breath, trying to quell my rising confusion, and stepped out, lifting the heavy cooler bag from the trunk. I walked up the clean stone pathway, my footsteps sounding loud in the quiet air. I was anticipating a reunion, a surprise, the gratitude of two elderly people. I was not prepared for the scene that greeted me through the large picture window next to the front door. On a wide back deck, leaning against a stainless steel railing with a bottle of beer in his hand, stood Mark. He was not alone. He was surrounded by 4 of his old university friends, men I hadn't seen in years. He was laughing, a loud, unrestrained sound of pure joy. Music drifted from speakers mounted on the wall, and on a large, gleaming grill, thick steaks were sizzling. There were no frail, elderly parents in sight. There was no yard work being done, no sense of solemn duty. There was only my husband, relaxed and carefree, in the middle of what was clearly a weekly party, a boisterous boys' club. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My head buzzed, and my vision swam for a moment as if the world had been knocked off its axis. I tried to step forward, to march to the door, to call out his name, but my voice was trapped in my throat, strangled by a wave of pure, cold shock. I stood there on the stone path, paralyzed, my mind refusing to accept the reality of the scene in front of me. At that moment, one of Mark's friends slapped him on the back, and Mark threw his head back in a roar of genuine, unburdened laughter, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. The heavy thermal container in my hands, filled with the stew I had poured so much love into, suddenly felt impossibly cold and ridiculously heavy. It was a foolish, pathetic joke, and I was the punchline. I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to connect the man on that deck with the weary, burdened husband who came home to me every Sunday night, his face a mask of sorrow. This wasn't a fleeting affair, which in some ways might have been easier to understand. This was something else entirely. This was a different life, a carefully constructed stage play, and I had been unknowingly cast in a crucial, supporting role. Unable to watch for a second longer, I rushed back to my car. I didn't bother to be quiet. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the pristine country silence. I started the engine with a roar, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grip the key. Tears blurred my vision as I reversed recklessly out of the driveway and sped back onto the road, not knowing where I was going or what I would do. I drove blindly, tears of shock and a deep, burning humiliation streaming down my face. One thought pulsed in my mind, over and over again, the lie. The sheer, monumental, and insulting depth of the lie. I felt betrayed, deceived, and utterly broken. Everything I believed in, my happy, stable life, my good, dutiful husband, crumbled into dust in an instant. I recalled our wedding vows, his promises of honesty and partnership, our shared plans for a quiet future built on mutual trust. It all felt like a fiction now, a carefully crafted deception I had willingly and lovingly inhabited. I wondered when it had started, when my devoted husband had begun living this elaborate secret life. Had I been so blind, so wrapped up in my own narrative of his goodness, that I had ignored all the signs? Gradually, as the miles flew by, the raw shock began to give way to a cold, hard anger. A white-hot rage began to boil inside me. I wanted to turn the car around, to march onto that porch and smash the container of stew at his feet, to confront him in front of his laughing friends and expose him for the liar he was. But at the same time, I was paralyzed by a different, more powerful feeling, a deep and profound sense of shame. He had made a fool of me, and the thought of revealing my own gullibility to the world was, in that moment, unbearable. I pulled the car over to the side of a deserted road, the engine ticking in the sudden silence. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed, not loudly, but with deep, racking gasps that tore through my body, as if I were trying to expel the poison of the lie from my very lungs. I sat there for a long time, until the tears finally dried and my anger began to cool, leaving behind a cold, desolate, empty space inside me. A single, clear thought emerged from the wreckage of my emotions: what now? I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to understand everything. I drove home in a fog of hurt and confusion, rehearsing the evening ahead. I needed to see him perform the lie one more time, now that I knew the truth. When I got home, I unpacked the stew and the bread, putting it all into the refrigerator as if it were simply leftovers. I washed the thermal containers until they gleamed, my movements robotic. Then I sat in the living room and waited for my husband to come home from his other life. He walked through the door at his usual time, just after 9, and gave me his practiced, tired smile. "Long day," he said, sinking into his armchair with a theatrical sigh. "Mom's not doing so well. Her spirits are really low." I looked at him, at the man I had loved for 15 years, and felt nothing but a cold, vast emptiness. I saw the lie playing effortlessly across his features, a role he had perfected through more than 100 weekly performances. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm and distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "I made you some tea." He smiled gratefully, completely oblivious, and for the next hour, he painted a detailed picture of his difficult day. He was a masterful artist, I realized, creating a world of fiction with casual, convincing strokes. I just sat there and listened, my heart turning to a block of ice. I didn't go to the library the next day. I let a week pass. A full week of living with the lie, of watching him, of feeling like a ghost in my own home. I observed him with a new, cold clarity. I noticed things I had been blind to before: the way he guarded his phone, a quick, almost imperceptible flick of the wrist to angle the screen away from me, a second, older phone plugged in to charge in his home office, which he'd once told me was just for work emergencies, the way his face would light up for a moment at a text message before he composed his features back into a mask of weary solemnity. Finally, I went to the library. I felt like a spy in my own life, a ridiculous cliché of a betrayed wife searching for clues. With shaking hands, I typed the address of the country house into a public records database. The results appeared instantly. The property was owned by a numbered company. It took a bit more digging, cross-referencing names of his friends I'd seen, to uncover the truth. The house was a long-term weekend rental, the lease shared between Mark and the 4 friends from the porch. Their social media profiles, which I had never thought to look at before, were a horrifying gallery of their deception. There were dozens of photos, stretching back 2 years. Photos of barbecues, poker games, Super Bowl parties, and golf weekends. It was their escape, their man cave, their refuge from their adult lives. Then came the final, brutal piece of the puzzle. I searched for his parents. I found his father's name, an unusual one, linked to a recent article in the online edition of the Arizona Sun-Sentinel. It was a cheerful piece about the local pickleball league's annual championship. And there, in the accompanying photograph, were Mark's parents, tanned, vibrant, and smiling, looking anything but frail. That night, I didn't greet him at the door. I was sitting at our kitchen table when he came in. Laid out before me, like evidence in a courtroom, were the printed photos from his friends' social media pages, and next to them, the printout of the pickleball article with his beaming parents circled in red ink. He walked in, saw the display, and stopped dead. The color drained from his face. All the practiced weariness, all the actor's craft, vanished in an instant, leaving behind the stark, pale face of a man caught in an inescapable trap. He didn't even try to deny it. He just sank into a chair opposite me and put his head in his hands. He sat in silence for a long time, and I let the quiet stretch, refusing to fill it for him. Finally, he spoke, his voice halting and thick with a shame that was, for the first time in 2 years, completely real. He told me everything. He told me about the immense pressure of his job, about a promotion he'd been passed over for, about the quiet, gnawing feeling that his life had become a monotonous treadmill of responsibility. He said he felt like he was suffocating, not from a lack of love for me, but from a lack of air, a lack of freedom, a feeling that the responsible, dependable man he was supposed to be was all he would ever be. He missed his friends, he said. He missed the easy, uncomplicated camaraderie of his youth, a time before mortgages and deadlines and the silent pressure to be a perfect husband. He and his friends, all feeling a similar strain in their own lives, had hatched the plan after his parents had announced their move to Arizona. It started as a joke, a fantasy, but it quickly solidified into a real plan. He had framed it to me as a solemn duty because he was afraid to tell me the truth. He was afraid I would think he was unhappy with me, that he didn't love the quiet, stable life we had built together. "I didn't want to hurt you," he whispered, finally looking up at me, his eyes pleading, bloodshot with unshed tears. "I swear, Clara. It was never about not wanting to be with you. I love you. I love our life. I needed a space to breathe. A place where I wasn't Mark, the provider, or Mark, the husband. It was my stupid, cowardly way of getting a day off without having to have a fight about it, without making you worry that I was pulling away from you." He had twisted his profound, selfish deception into a misguided act of kindness, a lie he told to protect my feelings. The patronizing nature of his reasoning was the final, deepest insult. He hadn't just lied to me, he had fundamentally misjudged me. He had assumed I was too fragile, too simple, to handle the complex truth that her husband was feeling lost and needed an occasional escape. He had robbed me of the chance to understand, to help, to be a true partner. He had chosen to treat me like a child who needed to be protected from reality, while he played games with his friends. The quiet life I had cherished had not been a shared sanctuary. For him, it had been a cage from which he needed regular parole. I was silent for a long time, looking at the stranger sitting across my kitchen table. I searched his face, searching for the husband I had loved, the man I had built my entire world around. I couldn't find him. He was gone, hidden behind a mask he had worn for 2 years, a mask of lies he had presented to me every single Sunday. The trust that had been the bedrock of our marriage had not just been cracked, it had been pulverized into fine, worthless dust. I felt a strange and unsettling sense of calm settle over me, the eerie quiet that comes after a hurricane has passed, leaving behind a landscape that is forever and irrevocably changed. "I need you to pack a bag," I said, my voice devoid of heat or anger. It was flat, calm, and final. He looked up, his eyes wide with shock, as if he genuinely believed his tearful confession would be enough to earn him forgiveness. "What?" he stammered. "Clara, please. We can fix this. I'll stop. I'll never go there again." I slowly shook my head. "There is nothing left to fix, Mark," I said. "You didn't just lie about where you were going. You lied about who you are. And you made me an unwilling participant in your lie. My cooking, my care, my sympathy, it was all just a prop for your stage play. And the show is over." He left an hour later, a single suitcase in his hand. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that filled the house was different from any I had ever known. It wasn't lonely or empty. It was clean. It was honest. I walked into my kitchen, the heart of my home, and looked around at the familiar objects, the spice rack, the copper pots, the worn wooden countertops. For the first time in years, it felt like my own space, not a service station for someone else's life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that it would be built on truth. My truth. And it would start now. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories like this.